Burkina Faso has been pumping billions of liters of that water out into the driest parts of the country. And what it's actually doing to the land and to the water supply itself is more complicated than you'd expect. Let's get into it. To understand why this matters, you need the baseline. Burkina Faso sits right against the southern edge of the Sahara, and for decades it has been one of the most water-stressed countries on the African continent. Rainfall is short, unpredictable, and concentrated into just a few months a year. Between 2000 and 2022, this was the only country in West Africa where the share of the population with reliable access to basic drinking water actually went down. Against that backdrop, the idea of pumping billions of liters of water into the desert sounds less like an ambition and more like a survival strategy. More than 80% of Burkina Faso's population depends directly on agriculture and livestock for their livelihood, which means water scarcity here isn't an abstract environmental statistic. It's the single biggest factor determining whether millions of families eat well or go hungry in a given year. That's the pressure this entire dam and irrigation strategy has been built to relieve. The single biggest source of that water is the Bagre Dam, an earth-fill structure on the Nakambe River completed in 1993. Its reservoir holds a staggering 1.7 billion cubic meters of water, which in more everyday terms is 1.7 trillion liters. That single body of water was built to serve three purposes at once: generating hydroelectric power through two turbines producing around 16 to 17 megawatts, supplying water for livestock and drinking water systems, and irrigating agricultural land across a growth zone now known as the Bagre Development Hub, with the potential to eventually irrigate around 30,000 hectares. Bagre isn't the only reservoir doing this work either. The Samindeni Dam, another major multipurpose project, added roughly 1.05 billion cubic meters of additional water storage capacity to the country's total, again meant to serve irrigation, drinking water, and clean energy generation simultaneously. Between just these two projects, Burkina Faso is sitting on nearly 2.75 billion cubic meters, or 2.75 trillion liters, of stored water capacity that didn't meaningfully exist a generation ago. To put those numbers in a frame that's easier to picture, 2.75 trillion liters of stored water is roughly enough to fill over 1 million Olympic-sized swimming pools, sitting behind earth-filled dams in a country that most people still picture as uniformly parched. These aren't small local ponds either. Bagre's reservoir alone stretches around 400 kilometers at its maximum length, turning what was once a stretch of the Nakambe River Valley into one of the largest inland bodies of water in the entire country. Storing billions of liters of water is only half the challenge. The other half is getting it out to fields that, in some cases, sit dozens of kilometers away from the reservoir itself. This is where the more futuristic-looking infrastructure comes in. At the Douro perimeter, engineered specifically for dry season production, a solar-powered pumping station pulls water from the Kerchi Dam and delivers it at a rate of roughly 9,720 cubic meters every single hour. Run continuously across a full year, that single pumping station alone is capable of moving tens of billions of liters of water out into fields that would otherwise sit completely dry for most of the year. Further north, in the Suru Valley, right where Burkina Faso brushes up against the edge of the Sahara, engineers use Archimedean screw pumps to lift water directly from the Suru River into a gravity-fed network of canals and drains covering over 2,240 hectares of irrigated land. When that water hits the arid soil, the visual transformation is almost jarring. A bright green sheet of rice paddies sitting in what used to be scrubland, right on the desert's edge. None of this infrastructure runs on diesel generators trucked in at enormous cost either. The Douro pumping station's reliance on solar power is a deliberate design choice, letting the system move tens of thousands of cubic meters of water an hour without adding to the country's fuel import bill, or straining an electricity grid that already struggles to keep up with demand elsewhere. In a landlocked country, where fuel has to be trucked in across long, sometimes insecure supply routes, a pump that runs entirely on sunlight isn't just an environmental nicety, it's a genuine logistical advantage. So what actually happens when you pour billions of liters of water into land that hasn't reliably supported agriculture in generations? The numbers coming out of these irrigation zones are genuinely striking. In the Suru scheme, some farmers have reported incomes as much as 177% higher than their counterparts still relying on rain-fed farming alone. At Bagra, one of the major dam-fed agricultural zones, rice production reached nearly 12,000 tons in a single year. Rice processing facilities built to handle this new volume, like the plant in Kamsila, are now running at capacities of up to 400 tons of rice a day. It's not limited to rice either. Water from these irrigation networks has been used to experiment with crops that were long assumed impossible in this climate. Wheat, pineapples, even small orchard trials with fruit-like apples. None of these experiments turned the Sahel into a temperate farming belt overnight, but they demonstrated something that mattered enormously for a country trying to reduce its dependence on imported food. With a reliable, engineered water supply, land that looked permanently written off for agriculture could, in specific and carefully managed conditions, actually produce. There's a human side to these numbers too, easy to lose in the statistics. Families who spent generations depending entirely on a single unpredictable rainy season are now harvesting twice a year on irrigated plots, turning agriculture from a seasonal gamble into something closer to a predictable, plannable livelihood. That shift alone, independent of any single yield or income figure, changes how households plan for school fees, healthcare, and savings across an entire year instead of gambling everything on whether the rains arrive on time. Here's where the story gets genuinely more complicated than the highlight reel suggests, and it's the part worth paying close attention to. Researchers studying the long-term water balance of the Bagre Dam specifically modeled what happens as demand for that same reservoir keeps growing across hydropower, irrigation, drinking water, and livestock users simultaneously. Their findings were sobering. Under current usage growth trends, the model shows full coverage of all these competing demands, holding up only until around 2036. After that point, the study projects a serious decline in the dam's ability to meet electricity generation needs during the dry season, and by around 2050, the model shows the reservoir unable to fully satisfy the needs of any user group, hydropower, irrigation, drinking water, or livestock, during the driest months of the year. In other words, the very success of pumping billions of liters of water out to new farmland and new communities is quietly increasing the pressure on the same finite reservoir that has to supply electricity to the national grid, drinking water to nearby towns, and water to livestock herds all at once, especially during the dry season when rainfall isn't replenishing the system. This isn't a reason to think the entire strategy is failing, but it is a direct warning from the researchers who modeled it. Without changes to how that water gets allocated and managed over the coming decades, the same dam being celebrated today for turning desert into farmland could become the center of a genuine resource conflict between farmers, power utilities, and city water systems in 20 or 30 years. Think about what's actually driving that projected shortfall. It isn't a single bad decision, it's success compounding on itself. Every new hectare of irrigated farmland approved around Bagre adds another claim on the same fixed pool of stored water. Every new town or village connected to the reservoir's drinking water system adds another claim. Every megawatt of hydropower the national grid wants out of Bagre's turbines adds another claim. None of those individual decisions looks reckless in isolation. Expanding irrigation, connecting more villages to clean water, generating more electricity are all clearly good things on their own, but stacked together against a reservoir with a fixed capacity and a dry season that climate change is making longer and less predictable. The math eventually stops working, and that's exactly the scenario the researchers modeled. It's also worth zooming out, because Burkina Faso isn't acting in a vacuum here. Scientists studying satellite vegetation data across the wider Sahel region have documented a real, measurable greening trend across parts of the zone over the past several decades, a mix of natural rainfall recovery cycles and deliberate human land and water management efforts working together. Large-scale irrigation projects like Bagre and Samendeni are part of that broader regional story, a deliberate attempt to engineer resilience into a landscape that climate change is simultaneously making hotter, drier, and more unpredictable in the years ahead. This regional greening pattern is one of the more genuinely debated findings in Sahel climate science. Some researchers attribute it primarily to a partial recovery in rainfall after the catastrophic droughts of the 1970s and 1980s, while others point to deliberate land management techniques, water harvesting, tree planting, and exactly the kind of large-scale irrigation infrastructure Burkina Faso has been building as meaningful contributing factors. The honest scientific answer is that it's almost certainly a combination of both, natural climate variability doing part of the work and targeted human infrastructure investment doing the rest, which makes projects like Bagre and Samendeni a genuine, if partial, human contribution to a much larger regional trend rather than the sole cause of it. That tension between short-term visible success and long-term sustainability risk is really the honest headline here. Burkina Faso has genuinely succeeded in moving billions of liters of water into places that desperately needed it, and the visible results, thriving rice paddies, rising farmer incomes, and processing plants running at serious industrial capacity are real and well documented. But the same infrastructure powering that transformation comes with a built-in expiration date on its current usage pattern, one that researchers have already mapped out in detail. The land did turn green. The reservoirs did deliver billions of liters of water to fields that used to sit dry for most of the year, and the agricultural results, from rice tonnage to farmer income increases to entirely new processing industries, are genuinely documented, not just government talking points. That part of the story holds up. But the shocking twist isn't a disaster, it's a warning label quietly attached to a genuine success story. The same water strategy that's greening the desert today is also stacking up new demand on a finite reservoir system, and the researchers who ran the numbers are already flagging the 2030s and 2040s as the window where that tension starts to bite. Whether Burkina Faso manages that transition carefully, through better water allocation, expanded storage capacity, or slower irrigation expansion, or lets the competing demands collide the way the models suggest, will determine whether this becomes a genuine long-term water sovereignty story or a cautionary tale about pumping too much, too fast, out of a reservoir that was never designed to serve everyone at once. There's a broader lesson in this story that goes beyond one dam in one country. Turning a desert green with stored water is, in engineering terms, the easy part, a matter of concrete, turbines, pumps, and enough capital to build them. Managing the competing human demands on that water sustainably for the next 30 years is the genuinely hard part, and it's the part that rarely gets the dramatic drone footage or the triumphant government press release. The next chapter of this story won't be written by another dam opening ceremony, it'll be written by whether Burkina Faso can balance electricity, drinking water, and irrigated farmland fairly once the easy years of surplus capacity run out. If you want to see how this connects to the deep groundwater and aquifer side of Burkina Faso's water strategy, that video is on your screen right now. See you there.